Welcome to the Christmas Banquet by Nathaniel Hawthorne.
The Christmas Banquet is a frame narrative in which a man named Roderick has written about an imaginary holiday tradition that invites 10 of the most miserable persons that could be found. Writing about this scenario allows him to describe the character of someone who is otherwise elusive to the world around him. The imaginary tradition lasts for about the lifetime of the imagined individual, and when the moment of this person's death arrives, the tradition appears to come to an end. Roderick and his counterparts follow up with a few words about the story, and the overall frame narrative is complete.
The easiest way to understand the Christmas Banquet is to take note of its salient points. Apart from the framing aspect, the banquet itself, if we're to think of it as a real tradition, is one that invites people who are unhappy about their lives to commemorate the state of their misery while everyone else is celebrating Christmas. The important thing to consider about these invited guests is their reaction to a particular person who's been allowed to appear every year, a man who doesn't seem to be experiencing unhappiness. They are frustrated with him, but the man, whose name is Gervais Hastings, assures them that he belongs with the group. Eventually, we come to learn about him as someone who is cold, who claims he can feel neither joy nor sorrow. The impression that we're to experience as readers is the feeling that it's troubling to think of someone who is living among us, who is incapable of feeling emotions. The Christmas Banquet is a curious piece for the way it draws into focus the subject of what we know of today as depression, as defined by the disciplines of psychology and psychiatry. The very first guest, for example, had experienced a life of quiet misery, and so it seems that the banquet is the world's first concept of a therapy group. Its founder intended the banquet to be a place where like-minded individuals could meet as an organized expression of human discontent. But as we read, we find that the therapeutic element is inadvertent, and really it's non-existent. The guests talk about their woes, and scarcely do they depart, that the scene comes off like the vision of a sick fancy. The study of modern psychology and psychiatry has for its goal the healing of those who suffer from mental illness. And there is no healing at the Christmas Banquet. As a work of historical literature, the misery involved with the story is aligned more with the subject of philosophy, dark philosophy. Is it coincidence that Schopenhauer's ideas had begun to circulate during the age when the Christmas Banquet had been written?
Schopenhauer's metaphysics and philosophy of nature led him to the doctrine of pessimism, the view that sentient beings, with few exceptions, are bound to strive and suffer greatly, all without any ultimate purpose or justification, and thus life is not really worth living.
Equally as noticeable is the allegory of Plato's cave. Men pass before me like shadows on the wall, says Gervais Hastings. According to Plato, such shadows represent the distinction between what is real and what isn't. And Hastings' claim is that he is a man who is incapable of escaping his state of unreality. He identifies the feeling of his heart as a mere vapor, which means that if a person with a tangible heart in the real world can feel things like pain and sorrow, a vaporous-hearted man caught in the realm of unreality cannot. Gervais Hastings not only symbolizes the chained man of Plato's cave, but the shadows of which he sees on the wall as well. And it's interesting to note how the sculptor interprets this man as a moral monster. Because if we go back to our thoughts on the goals of psychology and psychiatry, whose aims are to heal those with mental afflictions, then we know that even in the modern age, the task of healing the unfeeling person can be daunting. Have you ever had to deal with a narcissist? Psychopaths can fit into a lineup like this, but we may even consider those who suffer from conditions of alexithymia, of which the criteria is much more benign and yet frightening nonetheless. The goal of the Christmas Banquet as a moralistic tale is to encourage readers to judge for themselves whether or not the essence of their lives have become vaporous, lest they find themselves to be moral monsters. With Gervais Hastings as our example, we find that the truth he discovers about himself leaves him frazzled, and even worse, we find that he is largely incurable. One of the more prominent features of the Christmas Banquet is that of a skeleton that is figured at the head of the dinner table. These are the bones of the tradition's founder, and they are provided by him in case any of the invites should wonder about the purpose of life. We are reminded of the memento mori, but its meaning takes on a different shape in this case. Memento mori is generally thought of as an image of inspiration for us to get out there and live while we can, because death is forever upon us. But the Christmas Banquet is a different animal, because the skeleton is more than a painted image. It's what's left of an actual dead man, which tends to evoke feelings that are a little more disturbing, especially if you're trying to eat. The skeleton doesn't move, it's grisly, and it represents the chilling lack of answers to the questions that life poses along the way. The banqueters have been invited because their lives are miserable, and so the skeleton is there to help them understand that it doesn't get any better when you're dead. I could have posted a reworked version of my close reading of the opening passage, but I chose not to. That is because the element of research involved with a first take is so valuable. In that video, you will find me assessing each phrase with the kind of resolve that is required of a close reading exercise. And there is a moment where I gloss over the instance of feeling stumped, but I'm not worried about how this makes me look, because I know deep down that it takes great patience and diligence to get through a piece written by Nathaniel Hawthorne. The section that I'm talking about is where I encounter the word illumination. He's saying, do not anticipate any further illumination from what I am about to read. And I am seen blaming this word for not entirely allowing the meaning to get through. But for those who know and understand the Christmas Banquet, we know that it has nothing to do with the word itself. Now, it is true that no one uses the word illumination in a situation like this anymore, but the definition of the word holds, and all Roderick is doing is using the word illumination as a substitute for an idea. Then be thankful, Roderick says, but do not anticipate any further illumination from what I am about to read. Within the context of the opening passage, this reply hardly makes any sense. It's not until the closing of the story that we're able to assign meaning to what he has said. Roderick has told his wife Rosina to be thankful, and we learn from the sculptor, from what he's been able to glean from the reading, that Gervais Hastings is a man who can hardly be described, hence the purpose of the entire story. Roderick has told his wife that even though she's able to ascertain a glimmering idea of the man he wants to describe. There's no point in trying anything further, he tells her, because the kind of person that has been presented by the end of the story is a man who is beyond the comprehension of those who are able to experience the emotion of a normal human being.